I focused on the navigation console of the USS Aurora, running final system checks as the crew moved purposefully around me. The experimental submarine hummed with a different energy than any vessel I'd served on in my 15 years in the Navy. Everything felt new and precise. The usual mechanical sounds replaced by the quiet purr of unfamiliar technology. "Navigation systems online and calibrated, Captain," I reported, glancing up at Captain Joseph Solomon, who stood at the center of the command deck. He nodded slightly, his attention already moving to another system check. I'd served under Solomon for 3 years now, but never on a vessel like this. The Aurora was unlike anything in the official naval fleet, sleeker, more advanced, and according to the classified briefings, capable of reaching depths that would crush conventional submarines. The command deck had 6 stations in a horseshoe shape, with the captain's chair at the open end. My navigation station was to the right of center, giving me a clear view of the main viewports and the crew. The lighting was softer blue, easier on the eyes during long missions compared to the standard bright fluorescence. "All hands to briefing positions," Solomon announced, his voice carrying the natural authority that had earned him respect throughout the fleet. The 12 of us gathered in the central area of the command deck. I stood next to Gavin at his communications station, watching as the 4 civilian scientists filed in from the lab section at the rear of the vessel. They kept to themselves mostly, their presence on a naval submarine unusual enough to raise questions among the crew. Dr. Gabriella Hunt led the civilian team. She moved with focused intensity, her dark eyes taking in every detail of our preparations. Unlike the other 3 scientists who seemed somewhat uncomfortable in the confined space of a submarine, Hunt looked perfectly at home. She stood slightly apart from her team, arms crossed, waiting for Solomon to begin. "As you all know, our mission parameters are classified Level 4, Solomon began, activating the holographic display at the center of the deck. A 3-dimensional map of the Pacific Ocean floor appeared, rotating slowly to show a deep trench system. We'll be mapping an uncharted section of the Mariana Trench while testing the Aurora's new sonar and pressure-resistant systems. I studied the map carefully, noting the unusual formations at the bottom of what appeared to be a narrow canyon that veered away from the known sections of the Mariana Trench. Something about the topography looked wrong to my experienced eye. Not impossible, but highly unusual for underwater formations. The mission is expected to last 14 days, Solomon continued. During this time, we'll be maintaining communications blackout except for scheduled check-ins with command. Dr. Hunt's team will be conducting their own research once we reach the target area. My eyes shifted to Hunt, who maintained a neutral expression. What kind of research required this kind of specialized submarine and secrecy? The mission brief we'd received had been light on details, focusing instead on the technical aspects of operating the Aurora. "Questions?" Solomon asked, looking around at the assembled crew. Lieutenant Rivera from Engineering raised her hand. "Sir, what's our maximum expected depth for this mission?" Solomon glanced briefly at Hunt before answering. "We'll be testing the Aurora's full capabilities. Exact depths will be determined as we assess conditions." A non-answer if I'd ever heard one. I exchanged a quick look with Gavin, who raised an eyebrow slightly. We'd served together on 3 deployments before this assignment. Neither of us were strangers to classified missions, but the vagueness here went beyond standard security protocols. "Anything else?" Solomon asked. When no one spoke up, he nodded once. "We detach in 20 minutes. Final checks on all systems." As the crew dispersed to their stations, I returned to my navigation console and continued monitoring the final calibrations. The sonar system on the Aurora was at least 3 generations beyond anything I'd worked with before, with resolution so precise it could map individual rocks on the ocean floor even at extreme depths. "What do you make of all this?" Gavin asked quietly, as he adjusted settings at his communication station next to mine. I kept my voice low, aware of how sound carried in the enclosed space. Not sure, but we're definitely not getting the full picture. Those scientists give me the creeps, he muttered. Especially Hunt. Always watching everything like she's taking mental notes. I glanced toward the rear of the command deck, where Hunt stood conferring with Solomon, their heads bent close together over a tablet. Their body language suggested familiarity. They'd worked together before this mission. Detachment sequence. Initiating. Came the announcement from the dock control. Stand by for umbilical disconnect. I turned my attention back to my station, feeling the subtle shift as the Aurora system switched fully to internal power. The digital readouts confirmed our position and status as green across the board. Whatever we were really doing out here, at least the submarine itself seemed fully operational. Umbilical disconnected. You are clear to maneuver, the dock controller's voice came through on the final communication. Acknowledged, Solomon replied, taking his place in the captain's chair. Mr. Walsh, take us out and begin descent pattern Alpha. Aye, Captain, I responded, inputting the commands. Beginning descent pattern Alpha. The Aurora moved smoothly as we pulled away from the naval vessel that had brought us to this remote Pacific location. The ocean surrounded us as we submerged, and I felt the familiar shift of leaving the surface world behind. I always found comfort in that moment when the submarine became our entire world, self-contained and ordered. Today felt different. A weight pressed against my chest as we descended, a sense of dread I couldn't place. I'd done dozens of dives, but none had triggered this before. I watched the depth gauge begin its steady count downward. 100 feet, 200, 500. The numbers continued to climb as we descended at a controlled rate, the pressure outside mounting while the Aurora's systems maintained our internal environment perfectly. Passing 1,000 feet, I announced. Solomon nodded, his eyes fixed forward on the viewports that showed nothing but the increasing darkness of the deep ocean. The exterior lights hadn't been activated yet, standard procedure to maintain natural vision adaptation as long as possible. At 3,000 feet, I noticed something unusual. The trajectory I had been given would take us far beyond the limits of our most advanced military submarines. Standard Navy operations rarely went below 2,000 feet, with only specialized research vessels going deeper. Sonar, report, Solomon ordered. All clear, sir, came the response from Petty Officer Lin at the sonar station. We have good readings on surrounding topography to 10,000 feet below our position. 10,000 feet. The number hung in my mind. We were headed into genuine deep-sea territory, the kind of depths where the pressure could implode a conventional submarine like an empty soda can. When we reached 5,000 feet, Solomon ordered the exterior lights on. The bright LEDs pierced the darkness, revealing the empty landscape around us. We were in a place where humans were never meant to be. I glanced over at Gavin, catching his eye momentarily. Neither of us needed to speak to acknowledge what we were both feeling. Something about this mission went far beyond unusual. The brief nod he gave me confirmed we shared the same unspoken concerns. Turning back to my station, I continued monitoring our descent. The navigation system showed us approaching the edge of the mapped zone, beyond which lay the uncharted trench that was supposedly our destination. I looked up to find Captain Solomon at the forward viewport, his posture rigid. His eyes were fixed on the darkness below us, not with uncertainty, but with the intensity of someone returning to a familiar place. In that moment, I realized Solomon knew exactly what we were looking for in these depths. And it wasn't just an uncharted trench. 8 hours into our descent, my fingers hovered over the navigation controls as I checked our position. The digital readout showed we'd passed 30,000 feet, a depth that would crush any regular submarine. Yet the Aurora moved steadily downward, her experimental hull holding strong. I glanced at the depth gauge again. The numbers made my stomach tighten. "Captain, we've just exceeded the deepest recorded submarine dive by almost 10,000 meters, I said, keeping my voice level despite the alarm bells ringing in my mind. Joseph Solomon stood at the forward viewport, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn around. "Noted, Lieutenant Walsh. Continue descent as planned." The command deck had grown quieter. The initial excitement faded into tense focus as we entered uncharted territory. Gavin shot me a look from his communications station, eyebrows raised. I nodded. Yes, this was beyond what we'd been briefed. My sonar display showed a narrow, canyon-like formation stretching below us into blackness. It resembled a massive crack in the ocean floor, its walls jagged and irregular. I adjusted our trajectory slightly to maintain our position in the center of the passage. "Course correction, 3 degrees port," I announced, maintaining central position in the trench. Dr. Hunt moved from her station to stand near the captain, studying the darkness beyond the viewport with unusual intensity. The rest of her team stayed huddled around their equipment in the lab section, occasionally casting nervous glances toward the command deck. "Captain, I'm tracking unusual temperature variations," Lieutenant Rivera called from engineering. "Nothing dangerous, but the water around us is about 2 degrees warmer than it should be at this depth." Solomon nodded without comment. As we continued our descent, the pitch-black water outside suddenly came alive with light. At first, I thought it was a malfunction in our exterior illumination, but the lights weren't coming from us. "Captain, look at the bioluminescence," one of the scientists said, leaning close to a smaller viewport. "There are multiple organisms. This is unprecedented at this depth." The darkness around us transformed into a hypnotic display of blue, green, and purple pulses. Creatures of various sizes, some no larger than my hand, others stretching several meters, drifted past the viewport. Their bodies pulsed with rhythmic patterns of light that seemed too organized to be random. "Are you seeing this?" Gavin whispered, abandoning his station to stand beside me. I nodded, transfixed. "They're moving in sequence." The bioluminescent organisms created a pathway ahead of us, lighting our way deeper into the trench. What unsettled me was how they parted before our submarine, not scattering like sea creatures usually do, but moving aside in unison as if they're behaving intelligently, I said quietly. Solomon turned slightly. "What was that, Lieutenant?" I hesitated, then pointed to the viewport. "The organisms, sir. They're parting before we reach them. Almost like they know we're here." Dr. Hunt made a small noise that might have been agreement or dismissal. I couldn't tell which. I adjusted our course again, following the canyon's gradual curve. The numbers on the depth gauge continued to increase. 35,000 feet, 38,000, 40,000. "Sir," I said, unable to keep the concern from my voice. "We're approaching depths that weren't even theoretically possible in our briefings." Solomon's shoulders tensed slightly. "The Aurora was built for this, Lieutenant. Her systems are performing as expected." "Yes, sir, but..." I stopped myself, reconsidering my words. "May I ask about our target depth?" "We continue until we reach the anomaly," he replied. "What anomaly?" I pressed, my unease growing. Before Solomon could answer, Green, our sonar technician, called out from his station. "Captain, massive contact dead ahead. Range 200 meters and closing." "Define massive, technician," Solomon ordered, moving quickly to the sonar station. Green's face paled. "Sir, it's bigger than us, much bigger, and it's moving toward our position." I felt the submarine slow as Solomon ordered a reduction in speed. The exterior lights illuminated the water ahead, but showed nothing beyond more of the bioluminescent creatures. Then the pattern of lights changed. The smaller organisms scattered in all directions, their orderly movement dissolved into chaos. "All stop," Solomon commanded. I input the command, bringing the Aurora to a complete halt. We hung suspended in the water, surrounded by darkness, broken only by the retreating lights of the fleeing creatures. "Sonar." "Report," Solomon said. "Contact maintaining position, sir. Range 100 meters. It's just sitting there." The command deck fell completely silent. Every crew member stared at the viewport, searching the darkness for whatever had triggered the sonar. Then I saw it. Two enormous circles of bioluminescence appeared in the blackness ahead, each larger than the Aurora itself. At first, I thought they might be some kind of underwater formation, until they blinked. Eyes. They were eyes. I couldn't look away. This creature was studying us with a sharp intelligence. In that moment, I realized we hadn't found it. It had allowed itself to be found. My console erupted with warning lights. Navigation systems began flashing error messages. Around the command deck, similar alerts appeared on other stations. "Captain, we're losing primary systems," Rivera called from engineering. "Propulsion is offline. Life support switching to backup." "External pressure sensors failing," another crew member reported. "Communications blackout," Gavin added. "All frequencies." I tried to reinitialize the navigation system, but my screen went dark, then flickered back with only basic functionality. "Sir," I said, my voice barely audible over the warning alarms. "We've lost navigational control. We're dead in the water." Solomon remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on those massive eyes watching us from the darkness. In that moment, I realized that our technology and planning meant nothing. We faced something that had likely existed long before humanity, and it was deciding what to do with us. I hunched over the darkened navigation console, fingers flying across the backup interface as warning lights flashed around the command deck. The primary systems remained dead, leaving us with only the most basic emergency functions. Nothing responded properly. Every time I thought I'd restored a navigation circuit, it failed again seconds later. "Anything?" Gavin asked from beside me, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Still working on it," I said, not looking up from the console. A sudden, powerful current slammed into the Aurora, sending us lurching sideways. I gripped the edge of the console to stay upright as loose items clattered across the deck. The massive creature was circling us. "Everyone maintain your stations," Captain Freeman ordered, his voice steady despite our dire situation. "Report any system changes immediately." Through the viewport, I saw the entity moving in the light. Its body was massive, hundreds of meters long, with skin like old stone, marked by deep scars and glowing patterns. I had never seen anything like it in my 15 years of naval service. Rivera called out from the engineering station, "Hull integrity at 87% and holding, but we're experiencing micro-fractures on the port side. The pressure at this depth is beyond our design tolerances, Captain." Another current hit us, gentler this time, rocking the submarine like a toy in a bathtub. The creature passed directly overhead, its massive underbelly briefly visible through the viewport. The sight of it made my stomach clench. This thing was larger than any whale, with a body structure unlike any known marine species. "Captain," Lieutenant Ramirez called out from the weapons station. "We still have limited functionality in the torpedo systems. I recommend we arm and prepare to—" "That's a negative, Lieutenant," Freeman cut him off immediately, his tone brooking no argument. "We will not take offensive action under any circumstances." "Sir, with respect," Ramirez started again. Freeman turned to face him directly. "That wasn't a suggestion, Lieutenant. Stand down." I looked up to see Ramirez's confused expression before going back to the navigation systems. My fingers were stiff as the environmental controls struggled without main power. "Life support report," Freeman commanded. Chen, the first officer, checked the readings at her station. "Oxygen levels at 78% and falling, Captain. Environmental systems are running on emergency power only." I did the mental calculations quickly. At our current consumption rate with 12 crew members and 4 scientists, we had maybe 6 hours before oxygen became critically low. Add the increasing hull stress from the crushing depth pressure, and our window might be even shorter. "Sir," I said, looking up at Freeman, "we need to restore propulsion. At our current rate of system degradation, we have 4 to 6 hours before our situation becomes fatal." The captain nodded, his expression grim but composed. "Understood, Lieutenant Walsh." For the next 20 minutes, I worked with Rivera and the engineering team via comms, attempting to reboot the primary navigation and propulsion systems. Nothing worked. It was as if the creature's presence had somehow disrupted our electrical systems at a fundamental level. The lights flickered, and the emergency systems wavered. I could see my breath with each exhale. "Hull integrity at 83%, Rivera reported, his voice noticeably tenser than before. "We're developing new stress points along the aft section." Freeman stood at the viewport, watching the darkness outside. The creature made another pass, its massive body sending us rolling to starboard. I caught a better glimpse this time. Long appendages trailing from its main body, covered in barnacle-like growths and scars. Some scars looked geometric, as if they were deliberate markings. The quiet hiss of a door opening drew my attention. Captain Freeman had emerged from his quarters, where he'd briefly retreated a few minutes earlier. His expression had changed subtly, still composed, but with something new behind his eyes. Something I couldn't quite identify. "I've made contact," he announced to the silent command deck. My hands froze over the controls. Everyone turned to stare at the captain. "Sir?" Chen asked, her brow furrowed. Freeman walked calmly to the center of the command deck. "Dr. Martinez has been working on repurposing some of our communications equipment to broadcast on frequencies we don't typically use. We've established a form of communication." I looked toward the science section where Martinez stood with wide eyes, nodding slowly. "What kind of communication?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "It's not language as we know it," Freeman said. "More like impressions and images. But the intent is clear." He looked at each of us. "The entity is ancient. It's been in these depths for thousands of years. It sees us as a threat." Gavin shifted nervously beside me. "So what does it want? For us to leave?" "Yes," Freeman said, "but it doesn't trust that we'll simply go and never return. It wants assurance." "What kind of assurance?" Chen asked. Freeman's gaze remained steady. "An arrangement has been made. The entity will allow the Aurora to return to the surface, but it requires someone to remain." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the creaking of the hull as another wave of pressure tested its limits. "Someone to remain?" I finally asked, though I already understood. "Me," Freeman said simply. "I will exit the vessel and make direct contact. Once I do, it will release the Aurora from whatever field is disrupting our systems." "That's suicide," Ramirez blurted out. "Sir, the pressure at this depth would—" "The entity has provided assurances regarding that concern," Freeman interrupted. "Dr. Martinez's readings suggest the creature generates some form of localized field that can counteract the pressure." I stood up from my station. "Captain, with all due respect, this is insane. We can't just..." "This is not open for discussion, Lieutenant," Freeman said firmly. "The arrangement has been made. And we're just supposed to trust this thing?" I asked, my voice rising despite my attempts to maintain composure. "Captain, you can't seriously be considering this." Freeman's expression softened. "Maverick, look around. We have no power. The hull is failing. Oxygen is running out. The entity has us at its mercy, yet it's offering most of us a way out." I walked around my station and approached him directly. "Then I'll go, or we can draw lots. But you can't just sacrifice yourself on the word of something we don't understand." "It specifically requested me," Freeman replied quietly. "It connected with my mind. It selected me." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. The captain I'd served under for 3 years was calmly discussing walking into the crushing depths to meet an impossible creature. Freeman turned to address the crew. "I'll be entering the dive chamber in 10 minutes. Once I've made direct contact, the system should reactivate, and First Officer Chen will assume command. Your orders are to return to the surface immediately and rendezvous with our support vessel." As he turned toward the airlock corridor, I moved quickly to block his path. The action was instinctive, probably bordering on insubordination, but I couldn't let him walk to his death without trying to stop him. "I can't let you do this, sir." Freeman stopped and looked at me with compassion. "The entity has existed for millennia, Maverick," he said, pressing a sealed envelope into my hand. "It was here before us, and it will remain long after. This is bigger than any of us." I looked down at the envelope, then back up at him. "What is this?" "Insurance," he said softly. "For after. Don't open it until you're back on the surface." His calm certainty shook me more than any display of fear would have. There was something in his eyes, a knowledge or understanding that seemed to reach beyond our current crisis. "Sir, please." I tried one more time, still physically blocking his path. "There has to be another way." Freeman put a hand on my shoulder. "There isn't. And deep down, you know that. Now please, stand aside, Lieutenant. That's an order." I remained frozen in place, my mind racing through alternatives, through arguments that might sway him. But his resolve never wavered, and the terrible weight of his words, "This is bigger than any of us," settled in my chest. I sensed something beneath them, a truth I wasn't ready to face. Slowly, reluctantly, I stepped aside, the sealed envelope clutched in my hand. I pressed my face against the glass of the viewport, watching in shock as Captain Freeman stepped out of the airlock and into the depths. Every instinct told me his body should have collapsed under the pressure, but it didn't. He remained intact, moving deliberately as he walked across the ocean floor toward the waiting creature. "This isn't possible," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. The beam from our external lights caught Freeman's figure as he approached the entity. Its massive form shifted, those enormous bioluminescent eyes tracking his approach. Freeman looked impossibly small against its ancient bulk. He raised a hand in what looked like a greeting or signal. Then, with terrifying suddenness, darkness swallowed him as he stepped beyond our light's reach. The moment Freeman vanished, the aurora shuddered around us. The dead consoles blazed back to life simultaneously, every screen lighting up at once. The familiar hum of the engines returned, and the emergency lights switched back to standard illumination. "All systems coming back online," Rivera called out from engineering. "Propulsion restored, hull integrity stabilizing." For several seconds, nobody moved. We all stared at the viewport where Freeman had disappeared. First Officer Chen broke the silence. "Lieutenant Walsh, status of navigation systems." I tore my eyes away from the darkness outside and looked down at my console. Navigation online and functional. Depth reading at 32,140 feet. Chen nodded and stepped to the captain's position. Her face remained composed, but I noticed the slight tremor in her hands. All stations report in. One by one, the crew confirmed their systems were operational. Chen stood straighter, squaring her shoulders. Lieutenant Walsh, plot a course for surface ascent. Standard decompression protocol. I input the commands, feeling a strange disconnect between my fingers and my brain. Course plotted. Estimated surface time in 16 hours with proper decompression stops. Execute, Chen ordered. The Aurora began to rise, the massive creature no longer visible through the viewport. I glanced down at my uniform pocket where I'd slipped Freeman's sealed envelope. My fingers itched to tear it open, to understand what he knew that the rest of us didn't. But orders were orders, and Freeman had been clear. The envelope was for after. After what exactly? After we reached the surface? After we reported to command? The next 16 hours felt endless. The crew stayed at their stations, but conversation had stopped. Occasionally, someone shared necessary information. Depth readings, hull status, oxygen levels, but nothing more. The weight of what we had witnessed hung over us all. I caught Gavin's eye across the command deck. He looked away quickly, focusing intently on his communications panel. None of us knew what to say. During hour 6 of our ascent, I noticed Dr. Martinez and her team huddled in the lab section. Unlike the rest of us, they weren't silent. They spoke in urgent, hushed tones, their heads bent over tablets as they frantically documented everything. Martinez looked up once, caught me watching, and quickly adjusted her body to block my view of their work. At hour 12, during one of our decompression holds, Chen approached my station. "How are you holding up, Lieutenant?" Her voice was low, professional. "Fine, ma'am." She nodded, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Whatever Freeman gave you before he left, is it secure?" My hand involuntarily moved toward my pocket. "How did you—" "I saw him hand it to you. I don't need to know what it is. Just confirm it's secure." "Yes, ma'am." "Secure." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then returned to her station. As we neared the surface, I thought about what happened to Freeman. Our captain had walked into darkness, sacrificing himself for us. I couldn't shake the images, his steady pace across the ocean floor, the creature's massive eyes, the moment darkness took him. "Surface in 2 minutes," I announced, my voice sounding strange in my ears after hours of near silence. Chen acknowledged with a nod. "Prepare for full surfacing procedures." The Aurora emerged into daylight, rocking gently. Sunlight flooded through the small viewports, bright after so long in darkness. "Surface achieved," I reported. "Stabilizing at periscope depth." "Communications, broadcast standard return protocol," Chen ordered Gavin. He hadn't even finished transmitting when the sonar operator spoke up. 3 vessels approaching rapidly from the north. Distance 2 nautical miles and closing. I pulled up the exterior camera feed on my display. 3 unmarked military vessels were cutting through the waves toward us with alarming speed. "No identification signals," Gavin reported, frowning. "They're not responding to standard hails." Chen's expression tightened. "Bring us to full surface. Prepare for possible boarding." The vessels surrounded us with precision that spoke of extensive planning and practice. Before we'd fully surfaced, they had taken position in a triangle formation around the Aurora. "They're sending a boarding party," Rivera reported from the external monitors. The sound of boots on metal echoed through the submarine as armed personnel entered through the top hatch. Their uniforms lacked any identifiable insignia, but their weapons and movements marked them clearly as military. Our military, but operating under protocols I'd never encountered. As they filed onto the command deck, I slipped my hand into my pocket and transferred Freeman's envelope to the inside pocket of my uniform jacket. The movement was smooth, practiced from years of submarine drills requiring quick, precise actions. A stern-faced officer stepped forward. All personnel will be escorted to separate debriefing locations. Gather your immediate personal effects and prepare to transfer. You will not communicate with each other during transport. No explanation, no questions allowed. Chen looked like she wanted to protest, but ultimately gave a curt nod to the crew. As I gathered my things, I watched Martinez and her team being escorted out first. The armed personnel flanking them didn't handle them roughly, but there was a different quality to their attention. The scientists weren't being treated like survivors needing debriefing. They were being handled like valuable assets requiring containment. 2 armed guards approached me. "Lieutenant Maverick Walsh, come with us, please." I followed them through the submarine corridors and up to the deck. The brightness of day stung my eyes after so long below. As they led me toward a waiting boat, I caught a glimpse of Martinez being escorted onto a separate vessel. The scientist who had been so animated below now moved with the resigned compliance of someone who knew exactly what was happening. That's when I realized whatever we faced in the depths was no surprise. The quick response, the unmarked vessels, the separation protocols. This was planned. The creature with ancient eyes that took our captain wasn't a discovery. It was the mission. And whatever Freeman had entrusted to me in that envelope was something these people either didn't know about or didn't want me to have. The guard behind me placed a firm hand on my shoulder, guiding me into the waiting boat. As we pulled away from the Aurora, I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced with questions I now knew better than to ask aloud. For 72 hours, they kept me in a windowless room that smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. The armed escort from the Aurora had transported me directly to this facility, wherever it was. I hadn't seen daylight since we'd surfaced from the trench. "State your name and rank for the record." The woman across the table wore a charcoal suit with no identifiable insignia. Her colleague, a man with a military haircut and civilian clothes, stood in the corner taking notes on a tablet. "Lieutenant Maverick Walsh, Navigation Officer, USS Aurora." My voice came out raspier than I expected. They'd given me water, but not enough. "And you understand this debriefing is classified under Section 17 protocols?" I nodded. "Yes." The woman leaned forward. "Describe again the events immediately preceding Captain Freeman's departure from the vessel." This was at least the 5th time they'd asked me to recount the same sequence. Their questions always circled back to Freeman's final moments and his communication with the entity. I kept my answers consistent, detailed but incomplete. I said nothing about the envelope tucked safely away in my personal effects, assuming they hadn't already searched them. Captain Freeman announced he had established contact with the entity through equipment Dr. Martinez had modified. I delivered the same account I'd given previously, watching their faces for reactions. He stated that the entity would allow the Aurora to return to the surface if someone remained behind. "And you believe Captain Freeman volunteered himself without coercion?" "He made the decision himself. He insisted it had to be him." The man in the corner looked up from his tablet. "Did Captain Freeman explain why the entity specifically requested him?" This question was new. I paused, recalibrating. "No." He simply said the entity had provided assurances regarding the pressure concerns. The woman slid a photograph across the table. "Is this what you saw?" The image showed a blurry shape, vaguely similar to what we'd encountered but lacking the bioluminescent patterns and scale that had made the creature so striking. It looked like a poor computer rendering rather than an actual photograph. "No," I said. What we encountered was larger, with distinct patterns of light across its body. The man and woman exchanged looks. "Lieutenant, we've reviewed all sensor data recovered from the Aurora. There is no evidence of any entity matching your description." I leaned forward. With respect, every crew member saw it. The sonar logs would have recorded. "The sonar logs show a geological formation, likely an underwater ridge or outcropping," the woman cut me off. "Nothing more." This pattern repeated for hours. They questioned me about system failures, Freeman's behavior in the days leading up to the incident, and particularly about any private communications he might have had with Dr. Martinez or her team. They never directly accused me of lying, but their questions grew increasingly pointed. Between sessions, they allowed me brief breaks to use the bathroom or eat bland meals in a small adjacent room. During one such break, I heard voices in the corridor outside. Third incident this quarter, the Barents Sea team reported similar communications attempts. The voices dropped as they moved past the door. I stored this information away, careful not to react when my interrogators returned. On what I calculated was the beginning of the third day, the questions changed. "Lieutenant Walsh, are you familiar with deep-sea pressure psychosis?" I looked at the new interrogator, a gray-haired man who had introduced himself only as Dr. Collins, Security Division. "I'm aware of the condition," I replied carefully. "Extreme depths can cause hallucinations, particularly with oxygen mixture imbalances, visual distortions, anthropomorphizing of natural phenomena. Even shared delusions among crew members are documented effects." I kept my expression neutral. Our oxygen systems were functioning normally until the encounter. He smiled thinly. "Until the geological anomaly triggered system failures. For 12 more hours, they alternated between technical questions about the Aurora's systems and increasingly pointed suggestions that what we had experienced was a combination of equipment failure and pressure-induced hallucinations. Finally, a stern-faced woman in a naval uniform entered the room. Debriefing concluded. Lieutenant Walsh is released to temporary quarters pending reassignment. They escorted me down a series of identical corridors to a small room containing a bed, desk, and bathroom. No windows. A digital clock on the wall read 22:17, my first confirmation of the time in 3 days. I had just sat on the edge of the bed when the door opened. Gavin Knapp stepped inside, looking thinner than he had on the Aurora. The door closed behind him. "Walsh," he said, his voice low. His eyes darted to the corners of the room, clearly searching for surveillance devices. I stood, genuinely relieved to see a familiar face. "Gavin, are you okay?" He moved closer. "Listen, we don't have much time. They're shipping me out tomorrow morning. Reassignment to the North Pacific Fleet. Something's wrong with the official story." "What have they told you?" I asked. Gavin's face tightened. "That's just it. My debriefing officer said the Aurora sank during a training exercise. All hands lost. That's the official report going to Naval Command." I felt the blood drain from my face. "All hands? But we're..." "Exactly." Gavin glanced at the door. Martinez and her team were taken elsewhere. Chen was transferred yesterday, wouldn't even look at me when they moved her out. And Rivera. The door swung open. 2 security personnel stood in the doorway. "Communications Officer Knapp, your presence is required for transport preparation. Gavin straightened. "We're not finished here." "Yes," said the taller guard. "You are. All crew contact is restricted until further notice." As they led Gavin away, he looked back over his shoulder. "Watch the currents, Maverick. They're not what they seem." The door closed, leaving me alone. I sat motionless on the bed for several minutes, processing. The Aurora officially sank with all hands. Yet here we were, alive and being separated. Something much bigger was happening. After checking the room thoroughly for surveillance, finding nothing obvious but assuming I was watched nonetheless, I retrieved my personal effects bag from under the bed. They'd returned my belongings, minus my phone and military ID. Freeman's envelope was still there, tucked into the lining of my duffel where I'd hidden it. I waited until the facility quieted for the night. At Oro 147, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded paper with handwritten coordinates, locations I recognized as deep ocean trenches around the Pacific Rim. Beside each set of numbers were cryptic notations. Breach Point Alpha, dormant since 1952, activity increasing. A smaller note contained instructions. Nicholas Thornton, Sector 7 Command, authorization code Echo November 11-9, present in person only. The final page contained Freeman's message in his distinctive, precise handwriting. "What you saw was merely an emissary. The true threat remains dormant, for now. Trust no one who dismisses what you witnessed. Those who know the truth will never deny it." I read everything 3 times, committing it to memory. The coordinates, the codes, Thornton's name, all of it burned into my mind. Then I tore the papers into tiny pieces, flushed half down the toilet, and dissolved the rest in the sink with hot water. Sitting on the edge of the bed afterward, I made my decision. Tomorrow, I would appear cooperative. I would sign whatever statements they put in front of me. I would accept their explanation of equipment failure and pressure-induced hallucinations. I would do whatever necessary to secure my release from this facility. Because Captain Freeman hadn't sacrificed himself for nothing. He'd given me a mission, and understanding the truth about what lay in those trenches now fell to me. The sedan dropped me off at a no-way facility, a gray building on a coastal bluff with satellite dishes and weather equipment on the roof. 2 weeks had passed since my time in that room and since I destroyed Freeman's note, but his final message still weighed on me. I showed my military ID to the guard at the checkpoint, noting how his uniform lacked any branch designation. His eyes lingered on my face longer than necessary before he nodded toward the entrance. "They're expecting you, Lieutenant Walsh." Inside, another checkpoint awaited. A woman with close-cropped hair ran my ID through a scanner, while a second guard waved a detection wand around my body. Neither spoke beyond necessary instructions. I followed them through a series of corridors that sloped gradually downward, each requiring different security clearances from my escorts. We descended into concrete hallways lined with security cameras. We stopped at an elevator that needed a key card and a retinal scan from my escort. The elevator dropped quickly, much faster than normal. We were going deep underground. When the doors opened, we faced a final checkpoint with armed Marines standing at attention. These men wore proper uniforms with insignia I recognized, which somehow made this hidden facility feel more official, more serious. "Admiral Thornton is waiting," one Marine said, opening a heavy door that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. The office beyond was surprisingly modest. Wood paneling, a desk that had seen decades of use, and maps covering most available wall space. Behind the desk sat Nicholas Thornton, his white hair cut military short, his posture perfect despite being seated. The lines on his face seemed to have deepened since I'd last seen him at a Navy function years earlier. "Lieutenant Walsh," he said, not rising. "Have a seat." My escorts departed without a word, the heavy doors sealing with a pneumatic hiss behind them. I settled into the chair across from Thornton, noting the absence of any personal items in the office. No photos, no awards, nothing to suggest the man behind the desk had a life outside these walls. "Sir, I was instructed to deliver this to you directly," I said, removing Freeman's envelope from my jacket pocket. I placed it on the desk between us. Thornton made no move to take it for several seconds, his eyes fixed on mine as though measuring my worth. "Captain Freeman spoke highly of you," he finally said, picking up the envelope. "Said you were the most level-headed officer he'd served with." I kept my expression neutral as he opened the envelope. Freeman had anticipated this moment. The duplicate envelope I'd read and destroyed contained the same contents now spread before Admiral Thornton. I watched his face as he read, noting the subtle tightening around his eyes, the slight clench of his jaw. "Did you read this?" he asked without looking up. "No, sir. Captain Freeman sealed it before handing it to me." The lie came easily. Thornton's eyes flickered to my face, then back to the papers. "Freeman always was thorough," he muttered, almost to himself. "Always planning for contingencies." He gathered the papers and pressed a button beneath his desk. A hum filled the room. "Sound dampening system," he explained, noticing my reaction. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, Lieutenant." "Understood, sir." Thornton leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "You weren't in an uncharted trench." I waited, saying nothing. "You were in a classified section of the Mariana Trench, the same area where we lost the Challenger Deep Research Station in 2018. The revelation landed like a physical weight. I'd heard rumors about a deep-sea research platform that had gone offline, but the official story claimed mechanical failure during a storm. The Aurora wasn't on a mapping mission," I said, the pieces falling into place. "We were investigating what happened to the research station." "Yes and no," Thornton replied. "We knew what happened to it. What we needed to understand was why." I thought of the massive creature we'd encountered, its ancient eyes studying us with an intelligence that seemed impossible. "The entity that communicated with Freeman," I began. "Entities," Thornton corrected. "Plural. We've been tracking 7 distinct signatures since the first nuclear tests disturbed their hibernation in the 1940s. He tapped another button on his desk. A section of wall slid away, revealing a large screen. The display flickered to life, showing thermal and sonar imaging of ocean trenches I recognized from my years of navigation work. "Freeman's notes confirm what we suspected," Thornton continued. "The entities you encountered are merely sentinels, the smaller ones." The images on the screen changed, showing enormous shadowy forms moving through the depths. The scale markers along the edges of the screen made my stomach turn. What we'd seen in the Mariana Trench had been massive, dwarfing our submarine. These new images showed creatures that could swallow small islands. "These were recorded at various deep ocean trenches worldwide," Thornton said. "The Tonga Trench, the Puerto Rico Trench, the Java Trench, all within the last 18 months. I leaned forward, studying the footage. One clip showed what looked like a research submersible approaching one of the shapes. The feed abruptly cut to static. "What are they?" I asked. Thornton shut off the display. "They're ancient beyond our comprehension, Walsh. They predate humanity by millions of years. They retreated to the ocean depths during Earth's early development and entered a state of dormancy. Until our nuclear tests woke them up," I finished. "Exactly." Thornton's expression was serious. "Freeman's sacrifice bought us time, but the bigger threats are waking up. We've set up containment protocols at every known location. but it feels like trying to stop a flood with a fence. I thought of Freeman walking across the ocean floor, somehow surviving pressures that should have crushed him instantly. I thought of his final words, his warning about a dormant threat. "What was the deal Freeman made?" I asked. "How did he survive?" Thornton's expression hardened. "That information is classified beyond your clearance, Lieutenant." "With respect, sir, I was there. I saw it happen. The entire crew saw it." "What you think you saw and what actually occurred may not align," Thornton said flatly. "Extreme depths can cause hallucinations, distort perception." The same line they'd fed me during my interrogation. I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice level. "Then why am I here, sir? If what I saw wasn't real, why show me any of this?" Thornton was silent for a moment. "Because Freeman trusted you, and because I need you to understand the stakes." He picked up a folder from his desk and slid it toward me. I opened it to find discharge papers and pension documentation. "Your naval career is over, Walsh," Thornton said bluntly. "Accept the discharge and pension. We're offering you a comfortable retirement in a location of your choosing, within certain parameters." The implications were clear. I was being silenced, paid off. "And if I decline?" "That's not an option. This isn't a negotiation." Thornton's voice was ice. "Speak of this to no one. We're monitoring you and every other Aurora survivor. Forever." I looked down at the discharge papers. Medical discharge, with full benefits and a pension well above what my rank and years of service would normally warrant. A golden handcuff. "What about the others?" I asked. "Gavin Knapp? First Officer Chen?" "They've received similar arrangements. Dr. Martinez and her team have been reassigned to research positions more suited to their expertise." I knew what that meant. They were being kept under control, their knowledge contained. "Do I have time to consider the terms?" "No." Thornton pushed a pen across the desk. "Sign now. Your possessions have already been moved to temporary housing. From there, you'll be transported to your new residence." I picked up the pen, feeling the weight of my entire career, my future, balanced on its point. I thought of Freeman, of his sacrifice, of the coordinates and warnings in his notes. I signed the papers. Thornton collected them without checking my signature. "You'll be driven to your new residence tomorrow. Everything you need to know is in that folder. A stipend has been deposited in your account." He pressed the button again, and the hum in the room ceased. Our conversation was over. I stood, tucking the folder under my arm. "One last question, sir," I said at the door. "Did Freeman know? Before the mission, did he know what was down there?" Thornton's eyes met mine. For the briefest moment, I saw something like regret pass across his face. "Freeman volunteered, Lieutenant. That's all you need to know." The Marine outside opened the door, and I stepped through. As it closed behind me, I realized I might never know the full truth of what happened in that trench, or what Freeman had truly sacrificed himself for. I followed my escorts through the security checkpoints, up the elevator, and down the corridors of the weather monitoring station. Outside, the unmarked sedan waited to take me back to my temporary quarters. As I slid into the back seat, I felt the weight of the discharge papers in the folder. My naval career was over, but Freeman's final warning echoed in my mind. A true threat remained dormant, and now I knew that the government was aware of it and terrified. I jolted awake with a scream caught in my throat, sweat soaking through my t-shirt despite the cool Oregon coastal air coming through the half-open window. The same nightmare again. Freeman walking across the impossible ocean floor, raising his hand in that final greeting before disappearing into darkness. Those massive eyes watching from the void, the eyes that shouldn't have been there. the eyes no one believed we saw. My heart was racing as I swung my legs over the side of the bed and checked the time. 4:13 in the morning. Close enough to my usual 5 o'clock wake-up that trying to go back to sleep would be pointless. 6 months of this. 6 months since the aurora. 6 months of waking up to the same images playing behind my eyes. I padded barefoot to the kitchen of my small rented house and started the coffee maker. The routine was important. Wake up, coffee, shower, breakfast, morning walk along the beach. A perfectly normal routine for a retired naval officer living with PTSD from a classified accident that cost the lives of his entire crew. The cover story they'd given me was airtight, and the small coastal town of Halcyon Cove was remote enough that people respected my privacy while being friendly enough to make my presence here seem natural. They'd even given me a decent pension, enough to live comfortably in this quiet corner of Oregon, enough to make most men grateful. While the coffee brewed, I walked to what had once been a dining room but was now my workspace. I'd covered the windows with blinds, claiming sensitivity to bright light, another convenient PTSD symptom. What the blinds really did was hide the maps, charts, and notes that plastered the walls. 6 months of meticulous tracking. The largest map showed the Pacific Ocean, dotted with colored pins. Red for confirmed vessel disappearances, blue for reports of unusual seismic activity, yellow for unverified civilian accounts of something large moving in deep waters, green for the places where naval vessels had been spotted conducting what news reports called deep sea research. And then there were the black pins. These marked the coordinates from Freeman's notes, the locations of the 7 signatures they'd been tracking since the 1940s, the trenches where the entities slept, or had been sleeping. The coffee maker beeped. I poured myself a cup and returned to the map, studying the pattern that had emerged over 6 months. The red pins were spreading outward from each of the black ones, creating widening circles of maritime incidents. The blue pins followed similar patterns. Something was happening down there, and it was accelerating. My cell phone rang at exactly 8 o'clock, right on schedule. "Good morning, Lieutenant Walsh," said the woman's voice. Always the same voice, always using my rank, despite my retirement. "Good morning," I replied. "How are you feeling today?" "Fine." The same answer I gave every week. "Any unusual symptoms? Headaches? Vision changes?" "No." "Have you been maintaining your routine?" "Yes." "Any unusual visitors or contacts?" This was the real question, of course. They weren't checking on my wellness. They were checking to make sure I was staying quiet, staying isolated. Just the usual. Morning walks, coffee at the local place, some fishing. Excellent. Remember that your mental health team is available if you need to talk. Mental health team. What a joke. They were making sure I wasn't talking to anyone who might believe me. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "Have a good week, Lieutenant." She hung up, and I finished my coffee. Time for the shower, then breakfast, then my walk. The routine that kept them thinking I was a good, broken soldier accepting his fate. At 10:30, I drove to Seacliff Diner, exactly as I did every Tuesday and Thursday. The waitress Maggie greeted me with a smile and my usual order of coffee and toast. I took my regular table by the window, opened my worn copy of Moby Dick, the same book I'd been pretending to read for months, and waited. Irene arrived at 10:45, exactly 15 minutes after me, as always. She ordered her usual tea and muffin and sat at a table across the diner. We never arrived together, never sat together, never gave any indication we knew each other beyond casual nods that strangers in a small town might exchange. After 20 minutes, I left money for my bill and walked out. 15 minutes later, as I browsed fishing gear at the local hardware store, Irene appeared in the same aisle. "The water seems rougher today," she said while examining a fishing lure, our standard opening. "Tide's coming in stronger lately," I replied. This was our code. We never spoke directly about what we knew, what we'd seen. But in these brief conversations, we shared what we'd learned. 3 more tremors off the coast of Japan, she murmured, still looking at fishing equipment. Magnitude 6.2. No tsunami warnings. The blue pins on my map would need updating. "Research vessel spotted near the Tonga Trench yesterday," I said. "4th one this month. A green pin for the map. Coastal flooding in Peru. No seismic activity reported, but the tide rose 15 feet in 10 minutes, then receded." I nodded slightly. Another pattern. Unexplained tidal activity. "How's the new job?" I asked, maintaining our cover conversation for anyone listening. Irene had taken a position at a small engineering firm 30 miles up the coast. Too close to be coincidence. They wanted to keep us near each other but separated from everyone else who'd been on the Aurora. Easier to monitor us that way. Keeping me busy. Nothing like the old work, though. What she meant was that she was still looking for ways to access real oceanographic data, still trying to use her skills to track what was happening. We parted ways after a few more minutes of coded conversation and innocent small talk. Same as always. 2 broken survivors of a tragic accident, happening to live near each other, occasionally crossing paths in a small town. Nothing suspicious. I returned home, updated my map with the new information, and spent the afternoon cross-referencing news reports with the coordinates from Freeman's notes. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying. Whatever these things were, they were expanding their territory. Steadily, methodically. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner, there was a knock at my door. The mail carrier, holding a package that required a signature. "Sorry to bother you so late, Mr. Walsh," she said. This one needed hand delivery. The package had no return address, just my name and address printed on a standard shipping label. I signed for it, thanked her, and took it inside. I examined it carefully before opening it. Plain brown packaging, no identifying marks, about the size of a paperback book but heavier. After checking it thoroughly, I carefully opened it. Inside was a small padded envelope containing a thumb drive and a handwritten note on a scrap of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Freeman's. "Insurance. Use if they come ashore." My hand started shaking. Freeman had been planning this all along. He'd known what might happen and had arranged for this to reach me 6 months after his sacrifice. I looked at the thumb drive for a long time before deciding what to do. Whatever was on it would certainly violate every confidentiality agreement I'd signed. Accessing it would likely trigger whatever surveillance protocols they had in place. I waited until after midnight. Then I drove 40 miles to a 24-hour internet cafe in a larger coastal town, one I'd never visited before. I paid cash for an hour on one of their computers, inserted the drive, and accessed its contents through an encrypted browser. What I found confirmed my worst fears and went beyond them. Freeman had been gathering evidence for years, reports dating back to the first nuclear tests in 1945, classified documents about unexplained seismic events following deep-sea detonations, thermal imaging showing massive heat signatures moving through the deepest ocean trenches, sonar data that had been scrubbed from official records, and most chilling of all, translations of the communication Freeman had established with the entity in the trench. Somehow he'd managed to record and decode them. "The sleep ends," read one translation. "The surface warmers have grown too numerous. The balance tips." Another. "We ruled the surface when the air burned hot. We will rule again when the waters rise." And finally, The Great Awakening approaches. The temporary surface dwellers will return to the dust. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. These weren't just ancient creatures disturbed from their slumber. They were the original rulers of Earth, driven into the depths by some prehistoric shift in conditions. And now, with human activity changing the planet again, they were preparing to reclaim what they considered theirs, the surface world, our world. I carefully copied key files to a secure cloud storage account I'd created under a false name, then wiped the drive clean and removed it. I drove back to my house in a daze, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd learned. Freeman hadn't just sacrificed himself to buy time. He'd established contact with these entities, had learned their intentions, and had made sure that someone, me, would have this information when it became crucial. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I stared at the ceiling and finally understood the true nature of what we were facing. The entities weren't merely waking up. They were preparing for war. I couldn't sleep after getting back from the internet cafe. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen on Freeman's thumb drive. Around 5 in the morning, I gave up trying and moved to my workspace, where I'd spread out printed copies of the key files I'd saved to the cloud. My hand shook as I sorted through the documents. This wasn't just data Freeman had collected during our mission. He'd been gathering evidence for years. The oldest files dated back to 1945, when the first nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll occurred. There were classified memos, thermal images from deep-sea monitoring stations, and reports of unidentified sounds that defied analysis. The government had known about these entities since the first bomb tests. They'd been tracking them for decades as they awakened. Freeman organized everything, creating a timeline that showed rising activity with each major nuclear test. I picked up a folder labeled Transcripts and felt a chill run through me. These were communications logs, actual exchanges between Freeman and the creature. According to the notes, these occurred on frequencies far beyond human hearing range. Freeman had developed some kind of translation system that could interpret the signals. "How is this even possible?" I muttered, flipping through pages of conversations. One exchange from 3 weeks before our mission caught my eye. Entity. The Great Awakening approaches. The long sleep ends. Freeman. What is your purpose with this awakening? Entity. Reclamation. Return. The natural order restored. Freeman. And humanity. Entity. Temporary surface dwellers. A brief anomaly in the long cycle. I pushed away from the desk, my coffee long cold. Freeman had known exactly what we would find down there. He'd been communicating with them before we ever boarded the Aurora. Our mission wasn't just about mapping or research. It was something else entirely. The next 3 days, I barely slept, studying everything Freeman had collected. There were patterns to the seismic activity, predictable sequences that preceded major entity movements. According to Freeman's notes, when multiple coastal regions experienced simultaneous tremors, it signaled coordinated awakening. On the 4th morning, I was halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed with a news alert. An 8.1 magnitude earthquake had hit the Chilean coast. I switched on the TV and found emergency broadcasts showing massive damage. Before the reporter finished speaking, another alert. 7.8 off Japan. Within an hour, similar reports came from South Africa, Australia, and Ireland. "It's happening," I whispered. Freeman's notes had predicted synchronized seismic events across multiple continents. His research showed these weren't natural earthquakes, but massive entities shifting in the deep trenches as they prepared to move. I pulled out my burner phone, the one not being monitored by whoever called weekly to check on me. I'd purchased it months ago but never used it. Now I had no choice. Gavin answered on the 3rd ring. "Who's this?" His voice was tense, cautious. "It's me." Don't say my name. Pause. You broke protocol. Have you seen the news? Yeah, all of it. You thinking what I'm thinking? We need to meet. Not our usual spots. Already ahead of you, Gavin said. The old cannery at the point, north entrance. 2 hours. Is she coming? Yes. She's been tracking the patterns too. The line went dead. I gathered everything I needed. Freeman's files, my notes, and a small bag with essentials. If I was breaking isolation, I wouldn't be coming back to this house. The cannery was abandoned years ago, a rusted hulk overlooking a rocky part of the coast where tourists never ventured. I parked half a mile away and walked the rest, checking several times to make sure I wasn't followed. Gavin was already there, looking thinner than when I'd last seen him. Irene stood next to a makeshift table of wooden pallets, her hair cut short now, glasses perched on her nose as she studied a laptop screen. You look terrible, Gavin said as I approached. Nice to see you too. Irene glanced up. Did you bring the files? I nodded, placing my bag on the table. You've been watching the patterns. Since they released me, she said. They stuck me in some research position at a weather station. Limited access, but enough to track the seismic anomalies. She turned her laptop toward me. These aren't random earthquakes. They're following a sequence, just like the sonar patterns we saw before. The entity appeared. I finished. I know. Freeman had it all documented. I pulled out the files and spread them across the table. Gavin whistled softly. He knew way more than he let on, he said. Irene picked up one of the transcripts. He was communicating with them? How? Some kind of technology Martinez developed, I explained. Speaking of which, I handed them the final document Freeman had included, a set of coordinates with a cryptic note. When the tremors begin in sequence, find her. Gavin pulled out a map and marked the location. Middle of nowhere, Nevada. An abandoned mining complex, Irene said, typing rapidly on her keyboard. Owned by a shell company that traces back to nowhere, off the books. Freeman left us breadcrumbs, I said. Martinez isn't working for them. She's continuing her research in secret. Gavin shook his head. They'll be watching all of us. How do we even get there without them knowing? Irene smiled for the first time. I might have some ideas about that. The next 12 hours flew by. Irene found a way to loop the surveillance cameras outside her apartment. Gavin built signal jammers to hide our phone signals. We ditched our cars and used cash to buy an old truck from a farmer who asked no questions. We took turns driving, sticking to back roads, paying for gas with cash, and sleeping in shifts. We crossed into Nevada on the third day, following Forest Service roads until even those disappeared. The mining complex looked abandoned, with collapsed outbuildings and rusted equipment. Nothing suggested anyone had been here in decades. You sure this is the place? Gavin asked as we approached on foot, leaving the truck hidden behind a ridge. I checked the coordinates again. This is it. We searched for nearly an hour, finding nothing but empty buildings and old mining equipment. I was starting to doubt Freeman's information when Irene called us over to what looked like an old storage shed. Look at the dust pattern, she said, pointing to the ground. Someone's been here, recently. The door was locked, but Gavin made quick work of it with tools from his pack. Inside, instead of mining equipment, we found a modern keypad mounted on the back wall. Any ideas on the code? Gavin asked. I thought for a moment, then entered the date of our descent in the Aurora. The keypad flashed green, and the entire back wall slid aside, revealing a stairway leading underground. Freeman, you clever bastard, I whispered. We descended into a well-lit corridor that opened into what could only be described as a high-tech laboratory. Equipment hummed along the walls, Screens displayed data feeds, and in the center, hunched over a console that looked remarkably like the navigation system from the Aurora, was Dr. Martinez. She looked up as we entered, showing no surprise. "Right on schedule," she said, standing. "Joseph said you'd figure it out when the time was right." "You've been here all along?" I asked. She nodded. "Freeman knew they'd silence us after what we saw. He arranged this place years ago, smuggled equipment piece by piece." She gestured around the lab. "This is built from salvaged Aurora technology and prototypes that never officially existed." "You've been in contact with the entities," Irene said, studying a display showing waveform patterns like those on the thumb drive. "Freeman's sacrifice wasn't what it seemed," Martinez said. "He didn't just offer himself to save us. He established a direct neural connection with the entity's communication network." She pointed to a sealed chamber in the corner with equipment I didn't recognize. "This is how we've maintained the link." She tapped a few keys, and a recording played, unmistakably Freeman's voice, but distorted, as if coming through layers of interference. "They fear us because they recognize what we might become. They've been here before us. We'll be here after, unless we understand their weakness." "When was this recorded?" I asked. 2 months ago, Martinez said. "The connection is degrading, but he managed to send crucial information. The entities aren't just ancient creatures. They're part of a collective intelligence. And they have a vulnerability." She led us to another workstation with a complex waveform on the screen. "These electromagnetic frequencies disrupt their neural networks. It causes them pain, confusion, even fear. We've been refining the broadcast method, but we need more power, more range." Gavin studied the equipment. "This looks like a scaled-up version of our communications array from the Aurora." "It is," Martinez confirmed. "But we need military-grade broadcasting capabilities to make any real difference." I stared at the waveform, thinking about everything Freeman had done. The mission, the sacrifice, the evidence he'd gathered and hidden for us to find. "Freeman knew they were waking up," I said slowly. "He knew the government's containment strategies wouldn't work. The Aurora mission wasn't just about making contact. It was about finding their weakness." Martinez nodded. "And placing someone inside their network." A low rumble shook the facility, causing dust to drift from the ceiling. Another earthquake stronger than before. "They're getting closer to the surface," Irene said quietly. I looked around at all of us, the survivors of the Aurora, brought together again by Freeman's foresight. The tremors were growing worldwide. Time was running out. "Freeman's sacrifice wasn't just buying us time," I said, the realization finally clicking into place. "He was setting up the pieces for humanity's last possible defense." "Exactly," Martinez said, her eyes intense. "And now we need to make it count." The tremor felt different. I looked up from the monitoring screens in Martinez's underground facility and caught Gavin's eye as he paused mid-sentence with Irene. The vibration had a rhythm, not the chaotic shaking of tectonic plates, but something deliberate, like a massive heartbeat resonating through the ground. "That's not seismic," I said, moving to the central console where Martinez was already pulling up readings. Her fingers raced across the keyboard, pulling up waveform patterns that matched Freeman's recordings of entity movement, but at a much larger scale. "You're right. This is biomechanical." Before any of us could process what that meant, every alert system in the facility activated simultaneously. Screens that had been displaying seismic data now flashed with emergency broadcasts from around the world. I grabbed the remote and turned up the volume on the main monitor. Unprecedented disaster unfolding across the Pacific Rim. a news anchor was saying, her professional composure cracking as she looked down at incoming reports. We're receiving confirmation of massive tsunami events striking Japan, the Philippines, and the western coast of the United States simultaneously. I repeat, this is not isolated to a single location. The broadcast cut to helicopter footage of a coastal city, San Francisco, based on the glimpse of the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, with a wall of water at least 100 feet high, sweeping through the streets. Buildings crumbled like they were made of sand. My God, Gavin whispered beside me. Another screen showed similar devastation in Manila. A third displayed Tokyo. The pattern repeated across monitors as reports came in from Australia, Chile, South Africa. They're not just awakening, Irene said, her voice hollow with shock. They're coordinating. Martinez pulled up thermal imaging from deep-sea monitoring stations. The screens showed massive heat signatures moving through ocean trenches worldwide, forms so large they dwarfed surrounding geographical features. Look at this, she said, pointing to a live naval feed she'd accessed. This is off the coast of San Diego. The grainy footage showed something impossible, a shadowy mass rising from the ocean, its form obscured by churning water, but clearly larger than the destroyer filming it. For just a moment, bioluminescent patterns flashed across its surface before it submerged again, leaving a wake that capsized smaller vessels nearby. I felt my mouth go dry. They're coming ashore. The words hung in the air, matching the exact phrase from Freeman's warning. Insurance. Use if they come ashore. Military channels erupted with chatter as forces mobilized worldwide. Fighter jets scrambled over coastlines. Naval vessels formed defensive perimeters. Evacuation orders blanketed coastal regions as far as 20 miles inland. We need to get to Washington, I said, my decision crystallizing even as I spoke. Everything Freeman left us, the research, the disruption strategy, none of it matters if we can't get it to someone with the authority to implement it. The roads will be chaos, Gavin countered. Military blockades, mass evacuations. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the security credentials Freeman had left on the thumb drive. These are Admiral-level clearances. If anyone can get us through, it's Thornton. Nicholas Thornton? Martinez asked. The same one who debriefed you? I nodded. Freeman trusted him enough to point me his way. Whatever their history, Thornton has the access we need. We gathered everything essential. The electromagnetic disruption research, Martinez's tracking equipment, all the data Freeman had compiled over years of secret communication with the entities. Within 30 minutes, we were in a military-grade SUV Martinez had kept at the facility, heading east toward Washington, D.C. The journey was a nightmare of gridlocked highways and panicked civilians. Military checkpoints had been established at major intersections, turning away all but essential personnel. At the first blockade, I showed Freeman's credentials to a young National Guard lieutenant whose eyes widened when he scanned the clearance code. Sir, I need to call this in, he said, his voice wavering between protocol and urgency. Do it quickly, I replied. We're carrying time-sensitive intelligence critical to the defense effort. The call took less than a minute before we were waved through with an escort vehicle to clear our path to the next checkpoint. This pattern repeated across state lines, though each verification took longer as security tightened closer to the capital. Television screens in rest areas showed footage of what the media called oceanic anomalies, a term for the massive entities now visible in coastal waters worldwide. Military jets dropped bombs on shapes beneath the waves, but the explosions had no effect. Ships fired missiles that exploded against tough surfaces without causing damage. Look how they're moving, Irene said during a brief stop, pointing to footage from the English Channel. It's coordinated, like a military formation. She was right. The entities weren't simply emerging randomly. They were positioning themselves near major population centers, military installations, and strategic infrastructure. "They're targeting us," Gavin said quietly. "This isn't mindless destruction. It's tactical." 27 hours after leaving Nevada, our convoy reached the outskirts of Washington, D.C. The city was under martial law, with military vehicles patrolling empty streets. Our escort led us through a series of checkpoints until we reached the Pentagon, its massive structure surrounded by anti-aircraft batteries and mobile missile launchers that hadn't been there days ago. At the final security gate, our credentials were flagged. Armed guards surrounded our vehicle. "Exit the vehicle with your hands visible," came the command over a loudspeaker. We complied, and I immediately recognized the insignia of naval intelligence on the officers approaching us. They separated us, confiscating our equipment and documents. "Lieutenant Walsh," a stern-faced commander addressed me. "You're classified as a security risk under Protocol 17. You and your companions will be detained for questioning." "We don't have time for this," I insisted. "We have critical intelligence about the entities. Admiral Thornton needs to see it immediately." The commander's expression didn't change. "Admiral Thornton is currently engaged in emergency response operations. Tell him Captain Freeman's contingency is active," I said, playing my last card. "Tell him exactly that." Something flickered in the commander's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or uncertainty. He stepped away to make a call, speaking in low tones. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted subtly. "You'll be escorted to a secure room for preliminary questioning," he said. "Your equipment will be examined by our technical team. That equipment is the only thing that can accurately track these entities," Martinez interjected. "Your systems aren't calibrated to detect their neural network signatures." The commander hesitated, then gestured to one of his subordinates. "Bring the technical equipment with us." We were led through a series of security checkpoints, descending into the sublevels of the Pentagon, where the emergency command center had been established. The atmosphere was tense, with military personnel moving with urgent purpose between stations, displaying global tracking maps and communication systems. In a glass-walled conference room, we waited under guard for 20 minutes before the door opened, and Nicholas Thornton entered. He looked older than when I'd last seen him 6 months ago, with new lines etched into his face and a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Lieutenant Walsh," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. "I thought our last conversation was quite clear regarding your retirement terms." "The situation has changed, sir," I replied. "Captain Freeman left contingencies in place. We have information you need." Thornton studied each of us in turn, his gaze lingering on Martinez. "Dr. Martinez, intelligence suggested you had gone off-grid after your consultant work concluded." "I've been continuing my research," she said simply. "Outside official channels." "Show me what you have," Thornton said after a moment's consideration. Martinez set up her tracking system, connecting it to the room's main display. Immediately, the screen lit up with dozens of signals that weren't visible on the military's tracking systems. "This is a real-time neural network map," she explained. "The entities communicate through a frequency spectrum that conventional systems can't detect. But I can track them with precision your systems can't match." To demonstrate, she zoomed in on an area off the eastern seaboard. "There's an entity moving toward the Chesapeake Bay that your systems haven't detected yet. Based on its movement pattern, it will make contact with the coastline in approximately 47 minutes. One of Thornton's aides hurriedly verified this against their own systems, then looked up with shock. "Sir, she's right. Our deep-water sensors just picked up something massive, but it wasn't there on our last sweep. Thornton's expression hardened. Get that tracking system integrated with our defense grid immediately. He turned to us. You have 15 minutes to tell me everything. I laid out Freeman's research while Martinez and Irene unpacked the equipment. Gavin assisted the military technicians with patching Martinez's system into their network. Freeman knew what was down there, I explained. Not just what we encountered, but what it represented. These aren't isolated creatures. They're parts of a collective intelligence. We've figured that much out, Thornton said grimly. What we haven't figured out is how to stop them. Conventional weapons are useless. Missiles, depth charges, even bunker busters barely register as irritants. And nuclear options? Irene asked. Thornton's silence was answer enough. They'd only accelerate the awakening, I said, understanding. The entities are responding to energy signatures. Nuclear detonations would be like ringing a dinner bell. I pulled out the electromagnetic disruption research. Freeman developed this. It's a specific waveform that disrupts their neural networks, essentially creates pain or disorientation in their communication system. Thornton examined the documents with growing interest. How did Freeman develop this? The entities we encountered have been largely impenetrable to our research teams. Because Freeman wasn't just sacrificing himself when he left the Aurora, I said, the pieces finally coming together as I spoke. He knew the sacrifice was temporary. He was gathering intelligence from inside the entity's consciousness. That's how he was able to communicate with Martinez afterward, how he established the facility in Nevada. Martinez nodded. Freeman created a neural link with the entity network. He's been feeding information to me for months through equipment he smuggled into my lab. The disruption strategy is based on direct analysis of their neural patterns. As Martinez's detection system came online with the military grid, the full scope of our situation became devastatingly clear. The entities weren't just emerging from the trenches. They were positioning themselves strategically around the globe. They're not just ancient creatures, I said, studying the patterns. They're part of a collective intelligence that ruled Earth before retreating to the ocean during a prehistoric disaster. Now, with humanity's nuclear activities and climate changes disrupting their dormancy, they're reclaiming their domain. Thornton looked older by the minute. Can this disruption field be deployed at scale? Martinez nodded cautiously. Theoretically, the equipment we brought can be modified to work with your broadcast systems, but the power requirements are substantial. How substantial? Enough to cause regional blackouts, she admitted. The pulse would disrupt human technology too. Anything electronic within the broadcast radius. Thornton made a decision. We'll target the entity approaching the Chesapeake first. If this works, we can replicate it at other critical locations. For the next 30 minutes, military technicians worked alongside Martinez to integrate her disruption technology with their broadcast systems. Irene and Gavin assisted, while I continued analyzing Freeman's data for any additional insights. The entity will reach the outer edges of the broadcast range in 6 minutes, Martinez announced, making final adjustments to the system. Thornton gave the order to evacuate non-essential personnel from the affected grid sectors. Power was diverted from civilian infrastructure to support the massive energy surge the disruption field would require. Ready on your mark, sir, a technician reported. Thornton looked at me, then at Martinez. Doctor, it's your technology. I'm giving you operational control. Martinez took a deep breath, watching the monitor as the massive entity approached. Its size was staggering, nearly half a mile in length according to the sonar readings. 3, 2, 1. Initiating disruption field, she said, activating the system. The lights in the command center dimmed momentarily as power surged through the network. On the monitors, we watched as the massive waveform broadcast out into the ocean. For several seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then the entity's movement pattern changed abruptly. "It's turning!" someone shouted. "The entity is retreating!" The tracking data confirmed it. The massive creature was moving away from the coastline, its neural signature showing patterns consistent with disorientation or distress. A cheer went up around the room, humanity's first defensive victory against these ancient beings. But the celebration was short-lived. Secondary monitors began flashing red as reports came in from across Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. "We've lost the eastern power grid," an officer reported. "Electrical systems are failing across all 3 states, hospitals switching to emergency backup, air traffic control systems compromised." The cost of our victory was clear. The electromagnetic pulse had wiped out vital infrastructure, leaving millions without power. This was just one attack. Thornton's expression was grim as he turned to us. "It works. But at what cost? Can we afford to deploy this across every threatened coastline?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. We had found a way to repel the entities, but the price of each deployment would be catastrophic. As reports of the damage continued to pour in, I realized we had only just begun to understand the true scope of the battle ahead.